Warm welcome to everybody and good morning. Very, very big thank you on behalf of the Africa-Leds Partnership for joining us today for what is the launch event for our livestock community of practice at the Africa-Leds Partnership. In this world of online meetings, we understand that everybody is very busy with lots of meetings, but we're very grateful that you've taken the time to respond to our invite and to join us. We have quite a busy agenda. Aside from welcoming you all, we will have a couple of announcements, including a couple of housekeeping issues. This meeting is being held bilingually, so we will cover that and make sure that everybody is covered, whether you're Francophone or Anglophone. So just to go very quickly into a couple of housekeeping matters, we will ask that all of you keep your microphones muted so as not to let sound come in and interfere with any presentations that will be happening. So please make sure that your microphones are all muted. And if you do not mind, we would like to ask that you keep your videos off as well. If you are not going to be speaking, this helps to avoid distractions, but also to ensure that the bandwidth is conserved. In terms of the actual session, if time allows, we will open the floor for questions after each section. If not, please keep your questions and any comments you have for the section of the agenda today where we will be going into breakout sessions. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or post your question in the chat. The chat will be monitored through the meeting, so any questions or comments that you put in there shall not be ignored. And lastly, please feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video when you are given the floor to speak. Next slide, please. And I think probably most importantly is some guidance around the English and French translation. We'd like to give you a few tips on how to use the language interpretation function on Zoom. You will notice at the bottom of the screen that an interpretation icon and a pop-up message saying that a new translation service is available will be appearing in your menu at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We ask that you go ahead and click on the interpretation button and choose the language you'd like to hear. In this case, we are not doing multilingual, we just have French. So if you're Francophone, we will ask you to go ahead and press select French as your language. The interpretation button will now indicate that you've what your selected language is. And just to note that you will be able to hear your selected language at about 80% volume. And at about 20% just below that, in a much softer tone, you will hear the original meeting audio. So if you are listening in French, you will hear 80% volume in French and just 20% in English. That's a level which we hope will not be too distracting. If you'd like to mute or unmute the original video, you can also click on the corresponding option in the language button. To choose a different language, please follow the previous procedure by clicking on the interpretation button once again and going through the process. So if you wanted to switch back from French into English, then you would simply do that. We hope that is clear. And if there are any questions, of course, please just post them in the chat and our meeting team will make sure that, that you are responded to or taken care of. Next slide, please, Mel. Now, just to take us very briefly through this packed agenda that we have, we are going to start off with the welcoming remarks, and then we will do a very quick introduction to the Africa-Leds Partnership and the livestock community of practice that we are launching today. And then we will go into a presentation on the context of climate change and livestock in Africa, after which we'll have the opportunity to go into breakout sessions, which will be, you will get more instructions about the breakout sessions later, but the breakout sessions, we may have a couple of those in English, and we will also have a breakout session in French for the Francophones, after which we will come back and share reflections from the discussions that that emanated within the breakout session. Then we will give the opportunity to a couple of our partners to speak a little bit about their partnership with us at the Africa-Leds Partnership and their involvement in the livestock community of practice. And then at that point, we will be ending our session with a couple of closing remarks. And that will be pretty much our day. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this stage, it falls upon me to do a quick welcome before I go into a short introduction to the LEDS Global Partnership and the Africa LEDS Partnership. We were hoping to have some members of our steering committee with us this morning, but it seems like they're not available. But my task before I carry on any further, probably should introduce myself. My name is Josh Ogada, and I am the Secretariat Lead for the Africa LEDS Partnership based in Cape Town, South Africa. Yes, so as I was saying, we were hoping to have members of our steering committee join us to give a few welcoming remarks and set some context for today's meeting. But in the absence of that, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all. Just to say that this is a journey that has been going on for over a year now. We are calling this the launch event for the Africa LEDS Partnership Livestock Community of Practice. However, there is a team that has been working with us in the Secretariat for a little over a year now, making sure that the context and the objectives were clear. We are at the point now where we are able to present this to all of you, and we're very glad that you're able to join us. So we have, at the Africa LEDS Partnership, we have worked quite closely with our membership across the continent to make sure that we provide a platform for exchange of views, but also to set certain objectives, collective objectives, to push the agenda of low emissions development strategies on the continent. And one of the areas that we are focused on is the agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector, and specifically of interest has emerged around livestock, which is a very, very important sector on the continent. We will be speaking a little bit about the context and how we arrived at the decision to set up a livestock community of practice. But for those of you who are invited to this meeting, you are selected based on the fact that you are working in various capacities within the livestock sector. And it is our strong belief that all of you, as being potential members of this livestock community of practice, can make a meaningful contribution to meeting the objectives of our community of practice. Next slide, please. So I will just do a very quick introduction to the LEDS Global Partnership for those of you who may not be familiar with that, as well as the Africa LEDS Partnership. And then from there, I will segue into a little bit of some of the work that has gone into the background to establish a rationale and justification for us setting up this livestock community of practice. Next slide, please. So just to quickly introduce you to the LEDS Global Partnership. The LEDS Global Partnership was launched back in 2011, which means that last year we celebrated 10 years of the existence of the LEDS Global Partnership. And since then, in those 10 years, it's become a vibrant platform that provides opportunities for peer learning and collaboration around low emissions development strategies around the world. It is a network for peer learning, technical collaboration, and information exchange. It is also a network that allows different pathways to implementation of ambitious low emissions development strategies, as well as contributing to NDCs across the globe. It is very much country-driven in its approach and very much demand-driven, which means that in each of the regional partnerships, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we have a strong membership that is consulted very actively and plays an active role in determining what the agenda is and how this partnership can help build the capacity of practitioners in the LED space across the continent. As I did mention, there are 3 regional platforms: the Africa Regional Platform, which is the Africa LEDS Partnership; there's the Asian Platform, which is Asia LEDS; and LEDS LAC, which is the Latin American and Caribbean platform. Next slide, please. There are certain key action areas that the LEDS Global Partnership has focused on, and these span the different global partnerships. There's energy, there is transport, there's the AfLP sector, which we are talking about today. Then there are also cross-cutting themes, action areas such as finance, which undergird all of the work that we do across the different action areas, as well as resource efficiency. And a lot of this, the work that we do, especially with the Africa LEDS Partnership in context here, the work that we do is done primarily through communities of practice. So under energy, we have the Africa Mini-Grids Community of Practice, and under AfLP for the Africa LEDS Partnership, we primarily work through the livestock Livestock Community of Practice, which we're launching today, as well as the African Community of Practice on Soil Organic Carbon, which we will be launching in probably a month or so from now. So the targeted regional communities of practice, as I mentioned, focus on, this is across the global partnership, focus on topics such as e-mobility, mini-grids, private sector engagement, bioenergy, clean mobility, green bonds, and of course, as mentioned earlier on, AfLP, as well as others that might be emerge based on the needs of our memberships. Next slide, please. So the Africa-Leds partnership was conceived back in 2012 at the inaugural Leds Global Partnership meeting that was held in London. And the Africa-Leds partnership held its first meeting in Kinshasa in 2013, which means that next year we will be celebrating, this year we are celebrating our 10th anniversary, and next year will be 11 years since the first meeting was held in Kinshasa. Obviously, we're working in a remote space, and we are hoping that quite soon the global conditions will allow for us to be able to meet in person. Currently, we are sitting with over 600 members spanning at least 33 countries across the continent, and our membership is widespread across different sectors, including government, people working in project development, academic institutions, research, as well as non-governmental organizations. We work in very close collaboration with the LEDS Global Partnership Secretariat through a number of working groups that have been set up. Just a very brief check to our technical team. We have a note from Heikel to say that there is no more translation. So I'll just ask that if somebody could just maybe take a look at that. Thank you. We work in close collaboration with the LEDS Global Partnership Secretariat through different working groups that support the work that is being done by the different communities of practice and sector-specific groupings within the regional partnerships. These are the Energy Working Group, which supports for us on the African continent the work of the Africa Mini-Grids Community of Practice. And then we've also got the AfLP Working Group, which has provided a lot of support for us as in setting up the Livestock Community of Practice, and continue to do the same for the Soil Organic Carbon Community of Practice. Then, of course, there's the Finance Working Group, which supports the different communities of practice and the different work streams in all matters related to climate finance. Next slide, please. So our mission at the Africa-Leds Partnership is to promote low carbon emissions, climate resilient development, which serves to support the efforts to alleviate poverty, to create jobs, and to effectively and efficiently manage the environment on the continent. Our specific objectives are first and foremost to promote information exchange and coordination amongst different LEDS programs and country institutions that are either undertaking or supporting low emissions development strategies. We also have as one of our objectives to cultivate and support LEDS champions across the continent. We are very cognizant of the fact that a lot of you who are strong practitioners in different areas that fall under low emissions development strategies, whether it be livestock, agriculture in general, or even energy efficiency, do fantastic work. And we as a partnership seek to support the work that you do and bring that to the foreground. We also look to enhance capacity of LEDS design and implementation across the continent, whether it is through different trainings, through capacity building, by offering all kinds of opportunities that will lead to the enhancement of that capacity to design and implement LEDs across the continent. Next slide, please. In terms of the work, how we work, we have got a very strong regional focus in terms of strengthening membership and the engagement of our different members across the continent. We also focus on building regional partnerships and collaborations with different partner institutions and potential partners who are working in the same space. We do this through, as I mentioned, the Africa Mini-Grids Community of Practice. And also, we also focus on accessing finance for the different sectors, such as AfLP and energy, in the interest of LEDS implementation. We also work quite closely through the work of the Finance Working Group to mobilize investment and look for pathways for creating financial investment for NDC implementation. Next slide, please. So the priority areas, as I mentioned, are renewable energy and energy access, AfLP, finance, as well as regional partnerships which we build. Next slide, please. So specifically to zero in on the livestock community of practice, through a lot of consultations leading up to the setting up of the community of practice, certain common challenges in formulating plans and promoting climate action specifically within the livestock sector in Africa were identified. These include but are not limited to limited engagement of livestock sector officials and experts within the processes, the policy processes around climate change. We also identified the limited knowledge of livestock adaptation and mitigation options, as well as the links that those have to livestock development objectives across the continent. We also noted that there was a lack of data, knowledge, and tools to assess mitigation potential in the sector. And finally, we noticed that there was a dearth of engagement of climate finance with the livestock sector. And this is a problem that has been noted at a global level, not just in Africa, but working in Africa, it is something that we feel is important for us to address. Next slide, please. So these challenges cut across the design and implementation of not just NDCs, but also long-term strategies, as well as national adaptation plans. And these include the prioritization of adaptation actions and measures, the design of mitigation actions, policies, and measures, the inclusion of livestock mitigation measures, implementation of livestock adaptation and mitigation actions, as well as MRV and M&E within the livestock sector. Next slide, please. So to zero in specifically on the aim of this livestock community of practice, our stated aim is to enhance the capacities for design and implementation of long-term, low-emissions, climate-resilient development pathways within the livestock sector across the continent. And more specifically, we seek to do this by enhancing the members of the community of practices capacities to design and implement LEDs in the livestock sector, to increase the number of stakeholders involved in long-term strategy-related processes, engaged in co-learning on livestock sector-led design and implementation. Also, to share knowledge, tools, and skills amongst the members of the communities of practice and their stakeholders as well. And finally, to develop a demand-driven peer-to-peer learning platform for sharing, engagement, and communication on LEDs design and implementation in the livestock sector. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of topics that we have selected, but I believe that we will go into these a little bit in further detail when we go to our breakout section. So we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the approach that we are going to take operating and managing this livestock community of practice, we are going to make sure that we have spaces for sharing of experience, knowledge, tools, and information between countries through a peer-to-peer learning approach. So through meetings such as these going forward, we will be providing space for different countries and different members to share from each other's experience. We're going to very much focus on a member-driven approach, which can flexibly respond to country priorities and demands that arise during the process. So yes, we do have a strategy and a work plan and a program of action, which we will be presenting. But at the same time, we remain very open to you as the members to share with us what your respective priorities are so that we can meet those needs as well. We also want to make sure that we have flexible mechanisms to provide targeted technical assistance, which we'll be speaking about a little bit later, in order to meet the needs not met by other initiatives already existing, including addressing specific bottlenecks that can catalyze broader progress in the sector. Next slide, please. Now, before we go to the context on climate change and livestock in Africa, and I hand this over to our facilitator for today, Dr. Walter Shinurai, I've been notified that our chair for the Africa-Leds Partnership, Dr. George Wamukoya, has been able to join us. George, apologies, I did go into the introduction to Leds GP and AfLP, whereas this was going to happen after a warm welcome from you. So if you permit, I'm going to give you the floor to welcome our participants and give us a few words. George?
Yeah, thanks, colleagues. Thanks, Josh, for organizing this meeting. It's a very important meeting, given that livestock is critical for Africa. As the co-chair of the Africa Leds, I welcome all those colleagues who have joined and encourage you to participate effectively and more importantly, identify those key areas that we think that as Africa we need to focus on. The purpose of this, as Josh has indicated, among all those that he has stated, is to strengthen the capacity of our own African experts in the livestock and related areas, so that we are able to provide a kind of support to each other, and where necessary, I'm looking forward to having some program that we can implement as a regional approach, so that at least apart from just sharing the experiences, we have something that really helps our countries to address this very important sector called livestock. And so I'll be listening in, although I have other commitments, but just be assured that you have my full support, and we'll be happy to see the outcome of this so that we can inform the next steps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George, and your presence is very much appreciated. We understand that you've got lots of commitments, but we hope that you can stay at least for a little bit. But either way, we shall keep you apprised of how the discussions go going forward. Now, at this point, it is my pleasure to introduce one of the members of the core team who have been with us right from the beginning and have been essential to setting up not just the CoP, but also planning this meeting. I'd like to give you the floor, Dr. Walter Shinurai, to take us through the context on climate change and livestock in Africa, but also to take us through the proceedings of the rest of the day. Over to you, Walter. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Josh. I hope you can hear me clearly. Again, thanks to colleagues for joining us on this launch event as we try to introduce a new community of practice which is dedicated to the livestock sector. So I'm going to take you through this presentation so that we'll try and justify the reason why we need to have such a community of practice. So firstly, just to say this presentation was prepared by the members of the livestock core team, Prof. Araba, who is in Morocco, Bernard Kimoro from Kenya, Sengandao from Senegal, and myself here in Zimbabwe. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, I'm going to talk about the importance of livestock in Africa, and then contextualize the challenges that the livestock sector is facing here in Africa, and just highlight some of the adaptation and mitigation options in the sector. And more importantly, try to map the gaps and barriers that are making us not having a huge impact in terms of livestock climate actions, and of course the perspective from the core team desk. Next slide, please. So this is like common news to everyone, but every time we talk about livestock, it's important that we highlight that livestock is important. For example, here in Africa, it contributes between 20 to 50% of the agricultural GDP. But at global level, we can actually see that it supports about 40% of agricultural GDP. So that means it's a cause of importance to us. And of course, in terms of livelihoods, you can see that about 1.3 billion people in the world actually depend on livestock, particularly in Africa and Asia. And of course, beyond the livelihoods and economic importance, livestock have got other social and cultural functions, depending on geographical context here in Africa, from south to the north. So in more intensified systems, livestock also are much appreciated as a source of manure. And there are also some societies in which bride price has to be paid in the form of cattle. So they also have got some societal benefits which are not of monetary value. Next slide. So I'm sure by now it is evident from the IPPC's sixth assessment report and the recent one also, which was done in 2018, the special report, that the global temperature is going to increase, and this increase is mainly linked to anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, which means emissions due to human activities. So there is a need for us to maintain the global temperature to about 1.5 degrees Celsius below the pre-industrial levels. And we can only achieve this if we're going to reduce greenhouse gases. So the graph on my left is just showing us some observed trends in terms of global temperature and some scenarios to which that would happen. So a more concern is the purplish color. By the period around 2030 to 2040 there, we can actually see that there's no reduction of net carbon dioxide, non-carbon dioxide radiative forcing, and this results in a lower probability of limiting warming to below 1.5 degrees. So after all the countries have put forward all their NDCs, we still see that at least in the near future, it's not going to be possible for us to maintain temperature below 1.5 degrees. But perhaps if we step up our efforts around 2040, 2050, it is also possible that we can maintain temperature at least below the 2 degrees Celsius. And then on the right, we already see the impacts in terms of climate variability, just looking in the past 40 years or so. You can actually see that all regions in Africa, the general trend is that the variation is increasing from about 0.5 going up to about 1.5. And for all the regions in Africa, the variability is also, increasing. So it really means that we need to do something about that, because an increase in climate variation, it also means an increase in the variation of feed supply for our livestock systems and other downstream, impacts. Next slide. Okay, so because of that evidence and of course the concern across the global network, all parties that are all countries that are parties to the UNFCCC, they've engaged in monitoring and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. They've also made some efforts to take actions to reduce greenhouse gases and to adapt to the impacts of climate change through what are called nationally determined contributions, which are also monitored using the biannual update reports. And these are really methodological approaches of just trying to come with information at national level. So the inventories are, in terms of greenhouse gases, are categorized by sectors. And of course, agriculture, particularly livestock, is one of the sectors. And there are certain guidelines that we always use to try and track this information so that we can report the actions that we're taking to combat climate change. Next slide. So just to give more context, when we zoom in on in terms of the agricultural sector emissions across regions, we can see that Asia and the Americas have got the highest level of emissions at 43% and 25% respectively. And these regions contribute to more than 65% of the total agriculture and forestry, sector emissions. But if we come back home and look within the agricultural sector, within the 15% that African agriculture contributes to the global agricultural emissions, we can see that livestock play a key role through endemic fermentation, producing about half of the agricultural sector emissions in the region. But of course, these figures, they come with some errors due to some still data limitations. but the general picture still, it remains the same. So this actually shows us that livestock have got a huge role to play in also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and the environmental impact of livestock in Africa. Next slide. So what is really the challenge for the livestock sector in Africa? So the main challenge is that the population is growing, and that the growth in population also implies an increase in the demand of animal products. So what it really means here is that the livestock production must be adjusted to deal with climate change, such as variability and all those declining crop yield impacts. But at the same time, they should produce enough food to meet the population which is growing. So like it's now a fixed and forced kind of scenario here, because you are supposed to meet the growing demand at the same time you're under the impacts of climate change. And rural populations in Africa get most of their revenue from livestock activities. But generally, more than 70% of our livestock herd in Africa is in smallholder systems, which are generally low input systems. And in that way, you also see that there are also huge, greenhouse gas emission intensities due to low productivity. So it's now a complex of challenges, but the benefit is that if we can improve livestock productivity in a process, we also reduce emissions, either absolute emissions or emission intensities. Next slide, please. So emission intensities are high in low productivity systems such as Africa, because many of the factors that we mentioned previously of low resource input, low feed quality, low digestibility of feed, and improper herd management practices. So we can actually see that comparing the world average and the one for Africa, you can actually see that our emission intensities are high both for meat production from cattle, even meat production from poultry, as well as meat production in goats. So in general, across the board, you can actually see that when producing more greenhouse gases per unit of livestock product, either meat or milk that we're producing, and this is really a cause for concern. Next slide, please. So in various platforms where you're working in your organizations, I understand we all have a general appreciation of what sort of adaptation actions different players implementing in trying to adapt to the impacts of climate change. But just to give a highlight of some of the actions to reduce livestock sensitivity to climate change. It includes preventing deforestation and land use changes in the grassland sector, and of course promote sustainable water and pasture management practices. And of course, since climate change affects some of the forage species, it's important that we diversify so that those species that are not sensitive to climate or that are more drought resistant can actually help us adapt during periods of drought or stress. Then actions to increase the capacity. This now comes due to say all the actions that we mentioned above are more like on-farm actions in a disaggregated, farming units. But what we're learning is that for us to address adaptation in the livestock sector and have impact, we need to upscale and increase our capacity in terms of technical and financial support, and we also make sure that we address information access needs, and as well as promoting value chain approaches so that we can buffer the whole value chain and have huge impact in terms of adaptation. Next slide, please. So in terms of actions that different players are implementing in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Main actions that the best bet will reduce the emission intensities and increase productivity, at the same time. And these include the enhancement of energy use efficiency. Renewable energy can still be used in livestock systems. It's also one way of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Improving feed quality using a variety of practices, including processing. It also improves the digestibility of the feed and reduce methane emissions. Herd management practices, just maintaining the health herd is the best way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also just keeping only the most productive animals within the herd and cull all the animals that are not, productive. And of course, in our manure management facilities, we can either do some aerobic digestion of manure, or an approach to apply the manure in a sustainable manner. Other actions can also aim at increasing carbon sequestration in soils, because our livestock systems, especially here in Africa, they are dependent on grasslands or rangelands, and we can prevent deforestation and avoid other land use changes from grassland to say cropland. That's one way of reducing emissions. Or we can promote sustainable water and pasture management practices, as well as diversifying forage species and other feed resources. So you can already see a peak from my presentation that such practices to increase carbon sequestration, they give us both win-win solutions to adaptation, like adaptation benefits as in the previous slide, and as well as mitigation core benefits. Next slide. So just putting it more into context, the work that we are trying to do at the Africa Leads, we took a scan through and see how countries are performing at national level in terms of integrating their normal, livestock development actions into climate actions. And we've seen that since the NDCs in 2015 until recently to the revised NDCs, many countries have actually submitted NDCs that include national development strategies and climate change policies, and including livestock. But generally, only 6 countries have quantified their livestock mitigation actions, and they've actually provided the specific timelines and the greenhouse gas goals of how they will achieve that. And this does not really mean that there are a lot of mitigation actions that are occurring in the livestock sector, but livestock sector is one of the sectors with a complex system in terms of data requirements of disaggregating the livestock population and their feed resources. So the main challenge here is that there's no, or there is limited availability of accurate data at national level, at least for countries to include their actions and GHG mitigation potentials. And therefore, this highlights one of the gaps that we need to address. And on the adaptation side, we have up to 21 African countries committing to some livestock adaptation actions. But these actions, broadly speaking, are broad. They are not really more specific, and they are qualitative, which makes it difficult for us to track them in subsequent submissions. And generally in adaptation, there's also a lack of comparable indicators of adaptation across countries. So, but it is also worth noting that by virtue of those two observations, it means African countries are also prioritizing livestock adaptation to mitigation. But there's no conflict of interest in choosing a priority, as you saw in the past 2 slides, that some actions are going to deliver both win-win actions for adaptation and mitigation. Next slide. So our StockTech scan of what is happening in the region shows us some of the barriers that are limiting African livestock sector countries to make pledges in their NDCs about livestock actions. And the limited knowledge about local climate change impacts on African livestock system is one of them. And limited knowledge also about the quantified potential of adaptation and mitigation, actions. And this is require you to set out targets or goals which should be traceable and which should be achievable. But the issue of the lack of that knowledge is also limiting us in Africa. Then there's a lack of data, knowledge and tools to assess and monitor the impacts of adaptation measures and the technical and economic mitigation potential in the sector. So with regards to adaptation, this is generally a gap across the globe, but it also impacts us here in Africa, that there are no specified tools that we can actually standardize and use across the board to monitor the impacts of the adaptation measures. And more importantly, at policy level, there is a limited engagement of livestock sector policymakers and experts in national and international climate change processes. So we hear that there is 100 billion per year for adaptation from the Global Adaptation Fund, but very little of this is being accessed by livestock sector players, not only in Africa, but also across the globe. So it also means that it's a top priority for us to engage livestock policy makers into national climate change processes so that they can benefit from existing funds such as the Adaptation Fund. Then there is insufficient capacity to assess the cost benefit of mitigation and adaptation projects in the livestock sector. So perhaps we've got experts in various research institutions across the board, but we don't find a lot of research which outlines the cost benefit of mitigation and adaptation. And this could be one opportunity for us to engage better and include our livestock actions. And then last but not least, the informality and lack of cohesion among stakeholders in many African countries. So we need a platform where the livestock sector players will come and talk about climate change issues, exchange experiences and learn from each other, and help to adapt or develop new systems in our own countries. Next slide, please. So whilst there's not been a platform per se for a coordinated interaction of livestock sector players, but there are already a number of promising initiatives which can help reduce greenhouse gases in the livestock sector. For example, silage has already been shown that if you use it appropriately, it should reduce 23% of the emission intensity, or it can also increase 30% of milk production. The same as urea treatment can actually reduce your greenhouse gas emission intensities by 30% and increase milk yield by 43%. And the same as CoP, a legume, which can as well reduce greenhouse gas emission intensity by 25% and increase milk yield by 30%. And then, as we said earlier on, that if we diversify into other renewable energy sources, we can as well cut our carbon footprints. So if we can recycle our manure, especially in intensive systems, then also you've got the benefit of reducing greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. So from our core team desk, the perspective is that livestock is important in mitigation and adaptation to climate change. There's no really need to say, is it mitigation or adaptation, but what is important is to take action in the livestock sector. There's two huge technology and capacity building and financial gaps. And for countries to implement their NDCs, they need to increase capacity building and finance to support data collection, and also promote or enhance finance and technology transfer to support their monitoring, reporting and verification systems. And of course, research and development of low-cost, reliable indicators for mitigation and adaptation action. So in other words, is a two-pronged approach where we need to focus more on policy integration in terms of the livestock sector into climate change issues, and of course the research element where we need to generate more evidence and to back up and come up with measurable indicators which can enable us to trace these actions in our NDCs. Next slide. I think with this slide, this marks the end of my presentation. Thank you. I think we can open up for 5 minutes to get the reactions of our colleagues about the presentation that I've given, and more about the presentation about what Josh has presented earlier on. I'm looking into the chat. I think Josh will help me to read out some of the points in French.
Yes, one of the comments made by Mr. Abbas is around the levels of emissions in Europe, in the countries of Europe compared to Africa. Noting that in Europe, there have been certain moves that have been made towards changing consumption patterns around animal protein, and how that has been effective there, and the suggestion that it's possible maybe that for the continent of Africa, this is one of the options that could be looked into, different strategies to and make efforts to reduce consumption of animal protein. So that was just a reflection on the part of Abbas. And then just checking down, Heikel also talks about the difference that's been pointed out between greenhouse gas emissions between the two continents, and how that could be justified possibly by a more efficient production systems that exist in Europe vis-a-vis Africa. But I noticed George's hand is up.
Over to you, George.
Yeah, thanks, colleagues, and thanks for the presentations. I think one is very useful info, but let's look at it from Africa perspective. I think that from a policy perspective, as a policy person, I'll tell you, you have to look at it from not the science, but also the policy. If you don't balance the two, then you're going to have a problem, because you'll have a very good theoretical framing, but which cannot be realized from the policy perspective. And that's why when we start recommending or talking about numbers, we have to be very careful, because as you know, livestock in Africa, a large part of it has a cultural connotations, and therefore I would be very reluctant to pursue that line, because it came up in the negotiations in June, and it was a very sentimental thing, and I would be very reluctant to oversight discussions under this, which tend to contradict the Africa position. Secondly, is we must remove this dichotomy about adaptation and mitigation. In the reality, it doesn't exist. In fact, what we should be looking at is the core benefits. And then that will be more useful, because then you're looking at the system itself and saying what it can deliver if you make these interventions and enhance them. I think for me that is a more positive way, and it will help countries to deliver on the NDCs, because if you look at Article 4, paragraph 7 of the Paris Agreement, it's primarily looking at the core benefits arising from, for example, adaptation actions contributing to the NDC. And therefore, knowing that livestock is the main source of emissions from Africa, in the agriculture sector, then it becomes important to note that it's at the same time the most affected in terms of climate change, the impacts of climate change. And so any interventions that you make cannot just focus on mitigation, but they should look at what are those key highlight intervention areas that when you put in, will deliver, will enhance resilience, but also contribute towards emission reduction, but not in absolute terms, but in terms of intensities, as correctly pointed out. So for me, that will be a very, very important. And then I'm happy colleagues have raised the issue of indicators, whereas the indicators with respect to mitigations are clear. We have challenges with indicators for adaptation and adaptation co-benefits, and therefore that's an area that we may need to look at. We did some assessment of over 50 plus NDCs and NAPs on adaptation indicators, and we found that there were over 417 indicators in NDCs and NAPs. And the strange thing is that even if all those indicators, all the actions proposed were to be implemented, those indicators will not deliver and are progressive for one to know whether in fact we have adequate adaptation response or not, because some of the indicators are way off the actions that are being proposed. So revisiting the issue of indicators and trying to look at from our own perspective what those are becomes a very, very important area. So I just wanted to point out that livestock is a very, very sentimental area in Africa. And therefore, as a community of practice, we don't look at it from what is being done elsewhere. Look at it from the circumstances in Africa. For example, when you're looking at pastoralism, which is the majority, what is it in there that you will deal with? Don't just look at dairy. Dairy is very small. It's maybe big in Kenya, but in many other parts of Canada, it's not there. Or it's very limited. So I think let's address where the problem is. Let's not deal with a lot of theory from under this perspective. Thank you very much, and I beg to knock off because I have another engagement.
Thank you, George, for that powerful contribution. George is also behind the formation of this African Livestock Committee of Practices. He's the chair of the African co-chair of the African Lids Partnership. It was an honor to have you today. I know you're a busy man, but to still communicate with you the outcomes of the launch through a report that will come as a follow-up to this. Okay, I hope Certainly, I'm noting a lot of questions also there in the chat, because I see there are more and more questions, which I think we can, some of them we can discuss them when we come back from breakout groups and also contribute. But I cannot hear there's another contribution which says lack of climate finance in the livestock sector is the big problem. It curtailed innovations in tackling emissions in the sector. And we share the same perspective here in the Africa Leds, and we think this is one element which needs to be addressed as we try to promote countries to mainstream climate change in their livestock policies. Yes, Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, Walter, I noticed Lawrence's hand is up, but there are just a couple of comments that have come in French. One that says that whereas the need for capacity building is well noted amongst amongst professionals on the continent, it might be important to also consider sensitization and maybe education at the level of our those who rear the livestock to be open to different options in terms of changing the husbandry practices for livestock on the continent. And then another one that came in that notes that whereas that speaks more around how to measure the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions level, that this needs to be correlated more to surface area, especially when comparing Europe and Africa, should be related more to geographical space and surface area. Given that the European emissions are much larger considering the smaller surface area of that continent. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Lawrence. I'll give you a minute or so just to pass your contribution.
Okay, thank you so much for that one. Yeah, then in terms also of the contribution by George, and also the need for us to obviously move towards the low emission development practices, I think the comment of practice can also look at what are the issues, possibly cultural issues, but what are issues also in terms of business? How then do we ensure that we can also try to bring in paradigm shifting in terms of the whole program around livestock programming in our continent, given also the paradigm shifts that are also happening in other sectors, so that let's embed the challenges that we have, but let's then look at how then can we be able to sort of move towards paradigm shifting, understanding also the barriers which are embedded there, but still we need to transition somehow. But how then do we do that one? So at least let's marry those two things, so that at least to be able to also get political will progressively as we move in this practice. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you there, Lawrence. I like the word progressively, which means that we need to have proper plans within the livestock sector, which actually targets to say if 70% of livestock in a certain country is in the smallholder sector, what percent are we looking to develop in the next 5 years? Maybe 5% of that 70%, and then set out targets progressively. I think it's a very important point. Colleagues, I'll say that we'll discuss some of the points in the chat box when we come from the breakout sessions. So now we are going into the breakout sessions, and in the breakout sessions, we are really more concerned in terms of understanding if everyone here present during the launch has managed to understand the objectives of the Africa-led livestock community of practice, and if not, what are certain clarifications do you seek? We can discuss that in the group. As you can see, this is a new initiative. I also want to find out the relevance of the Africa Livestock Community of Practice to your work, and some of the expectations. Already we can see people have got expectations, just like what Lawrence and George shared with us. And who else should be invited to the stakeholder meetings? This is just a launch, but this network is supposed to be representative of the region, and also working with other organizations in the agricultural sector that have already been dealing with livestock. And of course, how could the Africa-led livestock community of practice benefit your work? Do you see any of your role in it, or similar activities? And then this should be able to inform us into the next steps of the livestock community of practice and the next, steps. So can we have people going into the groups? I'm sure people have already been allocated according to language, so that we enhance discussions. Okay, welcome back, colleagues. Please remember to choose your language there on the translation. And in terms of report back, I'll ask our French group to be the last one, just for us to be able to manage the technicalities of the interpretations and so forth. So I'm not sure if the French group was in room 4 or room 1 or room 2, but room 1, we can give you the platform to share with us what you discussed.
Hi, Walter. I think the French group was room 1, but I will give a feedback on behalf of room 2.
Okay.
We had a very... Yeah.
Okay. So maybe while you give back the reflections, it would be good to rebeam the questions in case someone wants to connect. Yes, thanks. Okay, go ahead, Roy.
Great. So on the first question, we agreed that everyone was quite clear on the objectives for the community of practice. There was some questions around specifically from Somalia, about the large pastoral system and how we can look at improving the capacity there and how the community of practice could potentially help with supporting the capacity there, given that it is quite a unique system. So there was questions about how do we prepare for this and support the capacity in these kinds of situations. There was another question around how membership works and how members can sign up to the community of practice and join it. And just on that, we'll be opening membership straight after this meeting, so anyone is welcome to join. And we really hope to continue to grow this membership over time. And then there was another point on potentially expanding the reach of our focus to think about other livestock species around the continent. On the second question, the idea was really that the community of practice is an opportunity for a platform to exchange and collaborate. And this comes into making sure that we have a lot of the right people around the table. Some of the people that we thought we should be including is farmer organizations. In Somalia, there's also livestock professional associations, as well as community animal health workers who should potentially be included. Also a point from Kenya, the inclusion of private sector is extremely important in order to mobilize some finances to support our activities, and also including civil society organizations to help with lobbying is important. And then on the third question, we didn't get around to going in depth in this one, but the one thing we did get from Bernard, who works with the Kenyan government, is that government could potentially provide the link to the policy aspect of the work in the community of practice. And that's it from my group.
Okay, thanks, Roy. Maybe I'll open up for reactions, but if there's anyone from Roy's group who think there's something that needs to be added, I'll go straight to give you what we discussed in room 3. Time was not enough for us. There were a lot of people who were eager to make contributions, but I can confirm that the first concern was from a representative of FAO from East Africa region. And he was just, the question was really to say, how does the African livestock community of practice cascade to a sub-regional level, with a suggestion to say we should be having sub-regional, community of practices, which then feed back to the continental, region, working group. And he also gave an example of their own regional, sub-regional, working group in East Africa, which is working on feed resources, feed inventorying, that kind of work. And it was, in my opinion, to say that this is also the same approach that we're going to take as the African Livestock Community of Practice. And the modalities of institutionalizing that is something that we're going to do after the launch, but already we're in the core team with such a sub-regional representation: Southern Africa, Eastern Africa, West, and the North. So our responses was, now I'm giving them haphazard, but everyone was clear with the objectives of the African Livestock Community of Practice. Of course, there was another question from Zimbabwe, Chino University. They were asking about membership, and I'm sure Ray have already mentioned about membership. We also had another contribution from FAO representative from South Sudan, and he was contemplating to say if their wish is that the livestock community of practice can actually provide tools to help countries to collect information, and also including funding research, so that we can help countries to report on greenhouse gas emissions. So that's another contribution. Then we also learned from another colleague from Malawi who says that they are not sure how the livestock community of practice is networked with other development organizations or regional organizations doing work in livestock in Africa. And it was good to learn that there is the International Atomic Agency, which is doing some work on inventorying of feed resources for cattle, with the aim to link this to the greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So we requested that we get some links to this project, because to some of us, this was our first time to hear about it. But the livestock CoP is inclusive. It's not meant for segregating other players. As you know, the sector itself is also very complex. Then what is more interesting that or more concerning which we got is on the expectations. So from the FAO East African representative, the point here is that there are so many community of practices beyond the livestock community of practice, or even other livestock community of practice. But the issue of sustainability, how can we make the livestock community of practice sustainable so that it's not a short-term project, but it will last forever? So the expectation here is that the livestock community of practice is going to take a proactive engagement of the farmers on the ground, so that this becomes a realization and it moves from being a talk. And they were citing their working group in East Africa, which is working with farmers to do that feed resource inventory. So one way of making the livestock community of practice as a recommendation from there, or as an expectation, is to say it's not about having many priority areas, but let's have very few priority areas, and then let's work on them, intensively, and come up with something which is impactful, and also which will enhance countries to actually realize their livestock sector NDCs. And lastly, another colleague from Zimbabwe said, let's engage more private sector and NGOs in the discourse, as the representation here might not be considering the private sector players and the others. So that's what we had. See here, if I missed anything, please just paste for me in the chat. Then room 4, did we have room 4? Or it's just 3 rooms?
Yeah, it was just 3 rooms.
Okay, so maybe we can go to the final group, which is room 1. Can we have room 1 report back?
Yes, thank you very much, Walter. I'll try to give some feedback from the French group, but I'll also invite Prof. Araba and any of the others if there are any points that I missed. So in general, I think one of the points that was raised was, and this is a point that has been raised in the chat as well, the notion of the international context is important. However, the importance of the particularities of the African continent and the importance of us working as a continent to look at the aspect of emissions and to come up with solutions and directions that we think would work best for the African continent. Another point that was raised was the importance of focusing, I think this is a point that George raised as well, on the adaptation versus mitigation, that our actions and efforts should be much more orientated towards adaptation, noting that the systems of production would be affected and are affected when you talk about mitigation, and therefore mitigation is not in a lot of ways compatible with the development objectives on the continent. So we as a continent also need to look at the different specific sectors, food systems in rural and urban areas, while trying to make connections with other human systems in order to increase resilience. So work on building resilience with less focus on mitigation and more focus on adaptation. Another point that was raised was the particular climate impacts that we face on the continent, the different hotspots we have, issues such as drought, and all of these need to be considered when making any efforts to reduce emissions. These need to be factored in. But also, yeah, so again, the last contribution was a reiteration of one that has been made in terms of focusing more on the African continent, but also looking at the particularities of different regions within the continent when coming up with the solutions to the issues that we face. Maybe Prof. Araba and anybody else in the group could add to that.
There's something, yeah, okay. Prof. Araba. But there's something in the chat there.
Ah, look.
Yes, well, you said the main main point that were discussed in the group, and we insisted on the fact that we have to focus on adaptation, especially the aspects on feed resources. Feed resources are the main points that we should focus on. The other aspect is to reinforce the resilience of livestock systems. That's the main important point. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Walter, yes, in the comment, it's Abbas Khaled, who unfortunately had to leave us, but he just points out that this is a really good initiative and that it would be important to gather all the different points of view that are shared in order to develop and set priorities for different objectives and contribute to how we work together. He also points out that it would be important to think outside the climate change context, to look at, for example, the different policy options necessary through in the development of NDCs, and also think in terms of how this group would operate at a sub-regional level, but also not just at the continental level, but also at a sub-regional level.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think that point keeps on coming from all the groups to say what's the strategy at the sub-regional level. So I would also want to say this is a follow-up activity that will communicate with the stakeholders as we move forward after the launch. And we're also going to have some sub-regional meetings, which will actually bring home some issues so that we don't generalize the issues to the African region per se, but of course with a common cause. With this, we greatly appreciate these contributions, and we'll communicate, of course, after the launch in some form of a newsletter or a report, so that we keep in touch. But what is more important is to say, let's keep the conduct of other stakeholders who are supposed to be in the livestock CoP, so that we reach out to many people, and we learn from many people engaging in various initiatives. Already we've learned about the International Atomic Agents doing something on livestock. To me, and I've never thought of the International Atomic Agents working on something to do with livestock, but there's methane in atoms in methane, so it's really an issue of concern to them, and it's a greenhouse gas. So now I'll hand over to Josh, unless if we have anything burning to give us the next steps.
Thank you so much, Walter. I was wondering if we wanted to listen to
sorry. Sorry. I'm sorry about that. How could I miss that? But I would like to hear a few words from our partners. As Josh said at the beginning, that behind the scenes, before the launch of the community of practice, we've been working with other partners who are also working on climate change and adaptation issues in the region. And I would like to open the floor to our representative from the PATPA, Oh, yes, this is.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Walter. I hope you do see me. Please let me know. And
Yes, we
whether
can see
hear
you.
me also. Great. First of all, thank you, for inviting us to the launch event of the Community of Practice on Livestock in the Africa-led Partnership. And congratulations to you for launching the Community of Practice. We are very much looking forward to collaborate with you and see how the Community of Practice evolves and how it will play a role in further strengthening capacities and providing opportunities for knowledge exchange, information exchange among the region. I wanted to share a few slides to introduce you to the work that we are doing. Please let me know if you will see the slides. Do you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I will switch to presentation mode. Please also, let me know if it works. Do you see the presentation mode?
Not yet from my end.
Now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, you see full screen. Okay, great.
Rosia, if you could just switch displays, so go to the top, display setting and switch displays. Go to the very top, display settings.
Actually, it has, I only see the taskbar. Sorry, it's not showing up now. Sorry, let me quickly figure it out because the display somehow is not there anymore.
Unless you'd like to continue on, we can see
Is
most of your.
You don't see any changes?
We don't see any changes, no. So go to your right, you should see display settings. You don't see it.
To the right. Unfortunately,
the top of your screen. Okay, no problem.
I think we can just continue.
Apologies for this. Somehow, it doesn't show me how to change the setting, which is quite unfortunate, but I don't want also to take the time of everyone here. I wanted to let you know shortly about the work that we are doing and that we are happy to collaborate with the Community of Practice on Livestock of the Africa-led Partnership. And as you already know, my name is Rosia Kempis-Bekova, and I work at the Partnership on Transparency in the Paris Agreement, the secretariat of which is hosted at the GIZ support project for implementation of the Paris Agreement. And the partnership was founded by the government of Germany, South Africa, and South Korea in order to provide technical support to countries to develop capacities, to exchange knowledge, information, and experiences on strengthening their MRV transparency systems in the countries and how to enhance their reporting systems as well. And the Climate Transparency Help Desk is a part of the partnership support. It is one of the main components of the partnership support, which is providing rapid, high quality and short-term technical assistance to countries on any issues related to transparency systems in these countries. And the support is extensively tailored to the needs and to the priorities that the countries has in order to set up a functioning transparency system. The types of support that we are providing under the Climate Transparency varies, and among few examples is that we support countries in reviewing their GHG inventories for different sectors. First of all, AfLP sector and the energy sector, also to support countries in preparing their biannual update reports, how to help countries to prepare for transition to the enhanced transparency framework, and of course to prepare their first biannual transparency reports that are due already after 2024. Other supports also include assistance in updating and developing nationally determined contributions and long-term strategies, and also, of course, how to help countries in improving their reporting on adaptation actions. The Transparency Help Desk includes various types of support, and once again, they are all tailored to the country context, to the needs of the country, and those options include developing reviews and providing expert guidance on various issues related to climate transparency, whether it is at the national level, at subnational level, or in the different sectors. We also organize in-country workshops, and now, of course, with the pandemic, we provide either virtual or hybrid workshops for the national experts, and of course, make available the different tools and studies that can help countries to make use of the latest knowledge or updated knowledge that exists there. And definitely one of the important areas is the exchange and learning through peer-to-peer exchange, through South-South exchange, where different countries at the different levels of preparation are engaging in collaboration with each other. The eligibility criteria of how countries can request support, it is, first of all, it's only support related to transparency, MRV issues, and the country needs to indicate its very strong interest in executing this work or the support that it is requesting, and only ODA countries that are on the ODA list are available for this support. And of course, we always closely coordinate and communicate with the UNFCCC focal points in the countries, and how to ensure that our work is either complementary to the ongoing work of other partners in the country, or how we can prepare countries to initiate a bigger initiative in terms of preparing their inventories and so forth. And some examples quickly of what type of work has been already done. For example, the Climate Help Desk has already collaborated in such countries as Algeria, Malawi, Grenada, Bolivia, Guinea-Bissau, and many other countries in Latin America, in Asia, Southeast Asia, and in Africa and beyond. So, and the topics of support also vary. And once again, it depends on what type of country needs are there and how we can address those needs and challenges. Some examples of direct support via the tools and guidances that we have developed. For example, there's a template for biannual update reports that can help countries to develop their BORs, the newly developed roadmap tool for how to prepare for preparing the first BTR report. And of course, we also address some issues related to the updating of the NDCs, where countries can make use of the NDC handover checklist and document and record all the relevant information that they collected during the updating of their NDCs. This includes the inventories, this includes the different models and baselines that were also developed for the updating process. And in case countries that find interesting such support, it is very simple process to do, simply to go into the website on transparency.org, and you will find all additional information about the work of the partnership, about details of the climate transparency help desk. And here, yeah, I indicated the emails to which countries can refer to, and here also included the link. I will share the slides after this event, so countries can have a look at it. And also I wanted to mention that the climate transparency help desk, of course, is mostly a country-to-country support. So we are focusing on supporting countries, but we are also interested how to promote learning among different countries within the region, and how they can share the experiences and how they can share how they address certain challenges. Therefore, we hope that through the community of practice on livestock, there will be such support available that countries can learn about certain tools, about certain guidances, and how these can help them to further develop their or enhance the inventories, particularly in the livestock sector. So this is quickly from my side, and please reach out to us in case if you have any further questions about the work of the Climate Transparency Help Desk. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosia, for such a wonderful presentation about PATPA. Yes, I can confirm to you that it's one of the things that we're already working on to help countries to, come up with tools or methodologies to improve their GHG inventory. With some of the members here in the Livestock CoP already engaged with the New Zealand Agricultural Research Centre on that. So maybe we can hear more from Andy.
Thank you, Walter. Yes, I'll just be brief, introducing the interest of the New Zealand Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Research Centre to support this livestock community of practice and the activities of its members. I mean, let's start with a quiz. Which country has 50% of its emissions from agriculture, of which 75% are from livestock? Well, it could be any of yours, but it's also New Zealand. So because New Zealand has a very similar emissions profile and faces similar challenges, so that the farmers want to maintain profitability, productivity, whilst adapting to climate change, and then greenhouse gases somewhere on the agenda as well. So for the farmers, what George was mentioning earlier, reducing the emission intensity by increasing productivity makes sense, but then the country also has set longer term ambitions to reduce absolute levels of emissions. So New Zealand's very keen to share its experience and learn together with other countries around issues in the agriculture sector, and particularly livestock, given the nature of their own, of New Zealand's own agricultural economy. I think one of the main experiences from New Zealand is about the importance of science and policymakers, scientists and policymakers working together. They have an annual greenhouse gas conference. It's based around the inventory, but it involves both scientists, inventory compilers, and policymakers. That's been one of the key sort of mechanisms through which science and policy have been well coordinated in New Zealand. So they're very keen to share their experience and also to support platforms like the Livestock Community of Practice, facilitated by the Africa-led partnership, precisely to have the kind of benefits for African partner countries that New Zealand has had in its own experience. So we stand ready with financial support from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Ministry of Primary Industries in New Zealand, and technical support as well to help out in whatever way we can as this initiative goes forward. So I look forward to seeing many successes and a lot of benefits for all the participants in the community of practice going forwards. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andy, for your words there. We've been working with Andy through the journey throughout last year, trying to see how we can actually come up with a livestock community of practice. And we'll continue to work with him and the New Zealand Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Center. Just to mention that we also have other partners that we've been working with, such as FAO and the International Livestock Research Institute. But perhaps we could not get representatives to say a word, but during the pre-launch period, we've worked closely with them to seek advice and also engage in their activities. So now perhaps it's the right time for me to hand over to you, Josh, to inform us about the important stage of the event, which is the next steps. How do we go from here?
Thank you very much, Walt, and thank you, everyone. I do notice that we are almost out of time and we're cognizant of that, so I will just be very brief. In terms of next steps, given that this was the launch, obviously there will be a report sent out to everybody in terms of communication after this launch to share whatever presentations and links that may have been talked about, but also to share with you what will be a formal invite to join this group. Obviously, in attending the meeting, we trust that you are keen to be a part of this community of practice, but that notwithstanding, formal invite, as well as a request to all of you. I know some of you did mention that there were perhaps certain groups that we needed to include. I think NGOs were mentioned in terms of the representativity of this community of practice. So we will be asking you to let us know as the Secretariat who within your networks you feel would be important to be part of this community of practice. We will also be sharing a program of work with you that we will have developed, as well as the opportunities that have been spoken about. Rosia talked about the important opportunities that PATPA, for example, presents, as well as those that are presented by our other partners. And we'll also be letting you know about the engagements going forward. We are hoping that quite soon we might be able to start talking about in-person meetings, but that remains to be seen. That notwithstanding, we will please keep in close contact. Just to mention that this is a community of practice, which would be different from us just having a typical big group that receives information. We are looking to active engagement with everybody, and we will do everything that we can to ensure that that is done in a way that works for everybody. Then last but not least, I want to give out some appreciations to the team that has worked, the leadership of Dr. George Wamukoya in setting up this, in helping us conceptualize and bring this group together. And of course, the core group of Walter, Professor Raba, Sega, as well as Bernard Kimoro from Kenya, who continue to support us as the core group and who are the engine that actually drives the work that we're doing. We really appreciate your work. We are very proud to have had a successful meeting bilingually, which means that my sincere thanks go to the interpreters, Chris and Sarah, for doing an excellent job and making sure that everybody participating was able to follow on. We will continue to work in a bilingual way because those are the two important languages on the continent, and we want everybody to be able to participate actively. And last but not least, to all of you as participants, as I did mention, it takes quite a commitment to carve time out of your busy schedules on a Monday morning to meet with us. We really, really appreciate your engagement and look forward to greater engagement going forward. We as the Secretariat will be here to support and facilitate this work. And sincere thanks to you, Andy, as well, and your team for having supported us to get to this point. And we look forward to fruitful discussions and greater contextualization and setting of priorities of the work that we want to do as a livestock community or practice going forward. And again, a special thanks to you, Walter, for facilitating this session. And with that, on behalf of the Secretariat, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody, and looking forward to keeping in touch with all of you. My apologies, it's actually Tuesday, but it's Monday because in South Africa, we had a public holiday yesterday. So it feels like the start of the week. But happy Tuesday to everybody, and looking forward to remaining in touch with all of you. Thank you very much.